So why are these talks at the UN General Assembly considered so important? More than 24 countries have the ability to produce nuclear power, but only a handful have nuclear weapons. Members of the elite club include the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. That's the US, Russia, the UK, France, and China. Add India and Pakistan, that makes 7. Israel is also believed to have a nuclear arsenal, but it's never confirmed that suspicion. And just like Iran, North Korea is suspected of trying to develop nuclear warheads. So also at the UN, there are unconfirmed reports suggesting the Security Council may have reached an agreement on Syria. The Associated Press, based on interviews with unnamed UN diplomats, says the Council's 5 permanent members have hammered out a resolution they can all agree to. It would require Syria to dismantle its chemical weapons. So for more on this developing story, let's turn to the CBC's Neil Macdonald live in our Washington bureau. What do you know at this point, Neil?
Well, as you say, there are unconfirmed reports that they are close to an agreement. Essentially what you have here is the United States wanting to continue its hawkish stance and back any threat that Syria will not comply with military force. A so-called Chapter 7 resolution. Russia, of course, doesn't want that. It doesn't want automatic any sanctions or any resolution concerning chemical weapons to be automatically backed with military force if Syria doesn't comply. Nor does Russia want any sort of reference of the Assad regime to the International Criminal Court at The Hague for prosecution for war crimes, which is something that America's allies, particularly France, has suggested. So it's a game of checkers. The fact is that military strikes, American military strikes, are off the table for now and for the foreseeable future. And America's trying to put as much teeth into this resolution as it can, and we'll see how successful it is probably sometime this week.
Right. And the fact is also that the civil war continues in Syria, right? Is any of this having any effect on what's happening on the ground?
Well, yes, and a disturbing effect. The Americans and their allies have been promoting the idea of dealing with the moderates in the rebel coalition in Syria. They want to concentrate on those people because there are some other less savory members of that coalition, including some that have been linked to al-Qaeda. Well, in the last couple of days, leaders of some of the biggest rebel groups have abandoned the so-called moderate leadership and have aligned themselves with al-Qaeda, calling for the establishment of an Islamic state with Sharia law. That is not good for the United States as it tries to preach this idea that the moderates can be dealt with, that weapons can be channeled to them without consequence in the future, without those weapons being turned back upon the United States at some time or falling into the wrong hands. It makes it all very difficult for the United States. And of course, it's wonderful for Bashar al-Assad because he can now, it buttresses his favorite song, which is, we're dealing with terrorists. Why don't you just let us do our job? So it's not good news for the United States, that happening, especially in the context of these talks.
All right. Good to speak with you, Neil Macdonald. Thank you.
My pleasure.